but let's get started. So thank you for joining us, Chantal. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Thanks for having us.
The way I like to do this is I don't like to give the whole bio and introduction to who you are and what you stand for, what you've done. I think that's going to come out in conversation and everybody can read your LinkedIn, which is very professionally designed. It's almost like you help people with their LinkedIn profiles. What I'd like to start with is if I was to ask you, what do you do? What's your business do today? Maybe start there.
100%. So our business is focused on helping organizations such as post-secondary institutions, not-for-profits, and employers mobilize mentorship to support their people in building and starting careers. At the heart of it, Levi, you and I, we've had this conversation through many years. We've worked together, but fundamentally, I believe life is too short to do work you don't love. It's a hard go of that. It's harder when we try and do it ourselves. And so mentorship has been the vehicle that we are using right now to help people start and build meaningful careers working with client organizations to do just that.
So the way you just described that, it sounds like you're like a consulting agency, but you're more than that. Maybe tell me a little bit about what what is your business model?
Yeah, 100%. And it's an interesting thing, and we can get into this too, because as a startup, so we'll be 3 years old in June this year, and I wouldn't say we've pivoted. That's too big of a word and the implications it has. However, we've evolved, right, in terms of how we do what we do. The why we do has stayed the center of the organization. My North Star and the North Star our team aligns to is to support 1 million people in building meaningful careers. There are so many different ways we can do that. However, I would argue that without any kind of technology infrastructure, we're never going to reach that kind of scale. And so we have a software that we use to help organizations create, manage, and essentially make their mentorship programs meaningful so that relationships are strong and can be built around an intentionality, not just we're going to go for a coffee and have a great chat and that's it. That has a place. But mentorship is different. Relationships, I would argue, are such a cornerstone of growing in our careers and overcoming blind spots. And again, so many different things that there's a benefit there that we've really centered down to say, okay, I truly believe mentorship can be one of the most transformational tools for any of us at any stage and several stages of our careers. So how do we help get that to people and everybody? Software, right? So we do have a software, but we also do consulting services to help organizations figure out how to do mentorship, right?
So I do, further in our conversation, I'm hoping we can chat about the decision of like the human side versus the technology side and the understanding of scalability. And I think that's like just from a decision of how to scale and whether to scale is an interesting. But before we get there, before we move too much further from the beginning and the introduction to who you are and what you stand for. One thing I'd love to hear is, when did you first think of yourself as an entrepreneur? And did it coincide with like starting your own business? And if not, why?
Yeah, and I think this is one of those labels that I find fascinating because I think, like mentorship, there are so many different ways that we could choose to define entrepreneur. And it is something that I would argue I never really internalized until last year. In the heart of COVID, in the heart of a pandemic where, the world was thrown into utter chaos, the client organizations that we work with, post-secondary, not-for-profit, really having to figure out what does this mean for us as for them as institutions and organizations that support people in navigating career, and us trying to figure out how to help our clients who didn't know what they needed anymore in figuring out what they need and just to be there and sit in the messiness of all of this and help them figure it out, that it sunk in to be like, this is a certain brand of crazy. And to say it with a smile and to laugh in a good way. And so it really took root for me last year. And I would argue maybe in the most full sense of what I had thought the term meant, where it was, it's absolutely a roller coaster ride. You're trying to navigate to somewhere where you don't have a roadmap. The roadmap changes 5 different times on a regular basis. Your clients change on a regular basis. How you're going to do what you do changes regularly. There are so many shiny objects that you could chase because they're exciting and it's new and there's big opportunity. When you've got big dreams, all of that's the realm of possibility. And so last year was this crystallizing of, okay, I got it on a personal level. Before that, it was, I knew I'd created a business with individuals, with clients, with labs. I knew we had a business model, we had products, we had services. So there was a business. But to me, entrepreneurship is more than just a business.
So how would you define it if you had to? Gun to the head.
Gun to the head. I think it is when you are the one that makes, like, the buck stops and starts with you. It is on the line because what you are doing, and absolutely for myself, I love what I do. I choose what I do. Doesn't mean there are not things that have to get done. And you and I have talked about this. In the weeds, that is not the fun stuff. It has to happen to make the fun stuff real and to drive the impact. To me, entrepreneurship is when you are driving to a big dream and you have no sweet clue how you're going to get there. You know you can't do it on your own. You know you have significantly more questions than answers, and you're crazy enough to sign up for it and stick with it anyway, right?
So I'm laughing because I just left a whole team strategy planning session. So shiny things, bubbles, it's very well aligned and timely for us. So at a similar note, I'm interested because you gave a little bit of a high level of where you're at now, what your business does, and I'm curious about how different what you're doing today is from when you started. What was it when it began?
Yeah, and to answer that, I kind of need to go back to before it was it. So as you would know, we actually incubated what is now On Point within another organization. So in 2015, I left a stable, great paying job, doing things that I mostly wasn't interested in anymore, process, paperwork, legal stuff, and joined a company by the name of Venor. And we really set out together. I'd worked with them, their recruitment firm at the time. I'd been a client of theirs. So we knew each other enough. And this was 3 years after the Ivany report in Nova Scotia released. Okay, we've got young people graduating from institutions, they're leaving, we've got companies that need them here. Why? Well, turns out it's a big, complex issue. No surprise, right? What we found was that there was a way for us to work together to figure it out. They were looking for opportunities to grow their impact. They're an Atlantic Canadian company, roots here, want to see their own kids be able to grow up and have opportunity here. Someone who came here to Atlantic Canada with no designs to stay and then ended up finding home and opportunity here. Our stuff aligned there. But we didn't know what we were actually going to be doing. We didn't know really what the question was either, other than there was this massive opportunity to connect young talent to the organizations that needed them. And that really was the start of what is now On Point. We did 2 years of market validation, if you want to put a label on it. I was talking to people. I was talking to recent grads. I was talking to soon to be recent grads, to parents, to instructors, to the employers, just trying to understand what was really, where were the biggest gaps? Where were the biggest opportunities? And how could we as a non-government, as a non-post-secondary, and as a for-profit company find ways to be part of a solution that was a complex problem? And so it was 2 years of a lot of questions, a lot of not knowing what we didn't even need to know, or what questions did we need to ask. But we got some really great early wins where we created, in particular, 2 kind of pilot programs, right? We had a little bit of the lab going. And in doing those labs with those early adopters, we realized, okay, actually the problem that we think we can attack, because I was hearing it over and over and over again, Levi, and I know you hear it as well. I was talking to individuals who had just paid $50, $60, $70,000+ to go get an education. And when I would ask them why, the answers I was getting were really lackluster. Mom or dad did it. An older brother did it. Nephew did it. That's just what was expected of me. It seemed like a good idea. And as an employer, I don't want people in my company who don't know that that's actually what they're passionate about, because I can't do that for you. And so that became the catalyst to say, okay, you know what? We can actually help people figure that out. We didn't at that point in time know it was going to be mentorship. It was through conversation, right? A lot of conversation. And then in 2018, we said, okay, you know what? We've got enough wins with our labs. We've got some of those labs turned into contracts and clients that we still work with to this day, 5 years in really to the work. But we said in 2018, okay, this is what we do. We help people figure out what it is they want to do and how to build a meaningful career. We're going to use mentorship to do that. Let's really dive in and hone in on that. We also at the time did career building workshops, a lot of them. We also at the time did custom program development. So there was no one thing that we were doing. It's what you do in the early days, right? You're putting puzzle pieces together and you're not really quite sure what the puzzle's going to look like just yet. Well, in 2021, now we have said mentorship is the vehicle we are using now. It is where we are focusing now. However, I'm not in the business of just mentorship. I'm in the business of giving people confidence. I'm in the business of helping people build lives where they get to be happy doing work that they actually give a shit about. Excuse the language, by the way.
All right, we'll just toggle that little button on the podcast app. It's now explicit, Chantal. No, I think it's great. So one of the things, like you're the people you want to help, especially when you're talking about the people who come out with all that education, or the people who are, lack of confidence or lack of direction, lack of purpose. My assumption is that those people are also not positioned. They're your core customer, but not your payer. So I think you've probably figured out a lot since then. But when you first, hit pavement to road, what were your thoughts on how do you help the people who aren't necessarily the best position to pay for it? It's a problem I know a lot of other entrepreneurs have. So I'm loving your thoughts around how you address that at the outset.
Yep, and absolutely, it is a constant nugget in our wheelhouse. So when in the early days, it was, you could argue, we had a B2C model. There was no model, like there was no revenue in the right in the early stages. I was just having conversations trying to figure out where we could help, trying to build themes and understanding of where are the consistent gaps, where are the consistent opportunities. And so you just do it. You find those people who are going to, again, be your early adopters and allow you to do that. And the early adopters in 2016, 2017 were individuals. Now, towards the end of that time, though, we were able to engage with two organizations in particular that were organizations. One was a post-secondary institute. The other was a not-for-profit. And both of them saw that they had a role to support their students or international students in being retained in Nova Scotia at that point in time. So the people that we were already talking to, which were the students, the recent graduates, the soon-to-be graduates, they knew, those organizations, that they wanted to help. They knew that they could do more by bringing somebody external to the table. And they were willing to work with us to figure out, what's this thing going to look like? How can we kind of combine forces and create impact that is bigger and more sustainable than what any one of us as independent organizations could have done on our own, right?
It's interesting because I'm just more spotlighting than asking a question. There's a lot of people who, because there's a growing area of business, I feel, that is, that messy middle. I'm not a not-for-profit, but I have a for-profit business targeting a complex problem. And I think I like it. I think that's the best way to solve some of those complex problems. But it's creating an interesting challenge internally, figuring out problem solution, because you essentially have a B2B business model addressing a B2C vision. Mm-hmm. And I think that's an interesting lens that you need to take your strategic decisions on. And I think I think it'll only grow for other businesses as well as your own.
Yeah. 100% constant conversation for us. And when we think about marketing and how we talk about what we do, we constantly straddle the line between, okay, how do we build capacity within our clients, which are the organizations, but at the same time, we've got to build capacity and buy-in with the people that our clients serve.
Yeah.
Mentorship doesn't happen to you. You have to want it. You have to want career growth. You have to want to engage in meaningful conversation. So we absolutely view like we've got to build capacity in both of our audiences, and it's different, 100%. It is the messy middle is a great way to talk about it.
Yeah. So I'd like to talk about we're another label that has all kind of meaning. How do you define a mentor?
Oh, yes. So I think this is another one of those conversations that we get into quite often, clearly, right? Given the business that we're in. And when we do the work that we do with client organizations, what we're trying to do is help them articulate, what does mentorship mean to you? So with the YWCA, how does mentorship look? How does it feel? What are the outcomes we're aiming it towards? Versus with the Schulich School of Law, versus with the Black Business Initiative and the Diversity Employment Network. So really trying, again, we kind of take a back seat and say we're an engine that attaches to the mentorship and programs, career development acceleration programs, whatever you want to call it, to the clients we work with. The commonality for us comes in a couple ways, and this is definitely fueled by my own personal story and beliefs. The understanding that I for mentorship to be as pure as it can be, I think is foundational. So when we look at the mentor relationship, this is not somebody who's a coach, because that's a paid relationship. You're paying somebody for their time. You are paying them to achieve a specific thing and a specific outcome. They are going to ask you questions. They're going to reflect things back to you 110%. They're going to hold you accountable. Hopefully it's part of how they're going to work with you. Those things can happen in mentorship as well. However, your mentor has no stake in the decisions and the outcome of the conversations, where your coach and supervisor, if we add a different layer to it, they absolutely have a bias because they're supposed to, because of their role. So it's a very different thing when you're trying to look at mentorship and for our view, as a pure vehicle to support somebody without a defined outcome of what success looks like other than what the mentee sets. A mentor's role is to guide, not direct. It is to help somebody learn through sharing experiences. That person, that mentee, has to judge those experiences on their own worth and their own values. The best description and definition I can give of a mentor, it's a mirror. A mirror doesn't judge. A mirror doesn't show you only parts and pieces of what you are. It shows you for who you fully are, and all the nooks and crannies can shine a light. You'll see things in a bit finer detail. You can dim the light, but you'll still see certain things. That's my best analogy I can give. And you've got a grin on your face. I'm curious to see what's up next.
So let's poke and prod a little bit. So I work in the central area of a lot of mentorship relationships, coaching relationships, business mentorships, peer mentors. And I know a lot of people who are really good leaders and role models, where if they heard your definition of mentor, they would never believe they'll ever be qualified to be a mentor. I'd love to know what your thought is on the formal word of mentor and the pros and cons of that type of relationship.
We launched a series earlier this year called Mentorship Monthly. And it was truly part of an effort for us to create some good conversations around what exactly does mentorship mean? And one of the questions we asked, and it actually became a cornerstone for us in subsequent events. And as we do them going forward, we'll continue to ask, because it gets at this question. I simply ask people, can you just introduce yourself and share whether or not you think you're a mentor, a mentee, or both? What was amazing to me is that we got very strong, I'm either this or this. I actually believe every single one of us is both. We're both at different times in our career for different people for different things. Sometimes we may be blatantly aware of it, so that it is maybe more on the formalized side of mentorship. So somebody asks and says, hey, Levi, I really love what I've seen you doing and growing in your own entrepreneurship career. Would you mentor me for a couple of months? I really want to figure out how to start my own business in blah, blah. And there's maybe a formality to it where they're calling that out, and you go, okay, cool. I can engage in that relationship, and we're going to agree to what this looks like together. Or it could be somebody who, quite frankly, as a peer, who's worked with you now for, I don't even know how many years, 3. I've never said that to you, that I consider you a mentor. I don't think, but 100% I do. I learn from you each and every single time we talk.
So it's
Right?
interesting though. So I was thinking about, as you were talking to that, and I work with lots of people, lots of business owners, lots of peer networking. I have never actually used the term mentor or mentee in relation to myself in any situation. But effectively, I'm sure that I do a lot of it. So, and the reason why I wanted to highlight it is because I think that there's a lot of mentorship going on, and I think it's needed, and it's a transition of confidence and experience that is really healthy. But I know a lot of people, both on both sides, who steer away from it because it's too scary of terminology. So it's like, I know lots of people I've worked with as students who, like, the idea of asking for a mentor is unbelievably difficult, but asking for the experience or sharing of advice isn't. So I'm always interested to highlight a little bit of that terminology. I have an interesting question from the audience that ties in at a nice point. Have you found that women are less likely to consider themselves as a mentor than men?
Anecdotally, and if I think about, so we work with a number of client organizations who specifically focus on supporting individuals who identify as women, whether that's women in technology, women in STEM, so you've got actually multiple layers there, right? We start to think about it from that perspective. At the same time, we also work with a number of organizations who serve other marginalized populations who have, again, additional challenges in conquering confidence, in conquering barriers that are both real and systemic in some cases, as well as those internal things in really trying to navigate and start meaningful careers. When I look at our population of clients and the mentors and mentees that we've seen and we work with through and with our clients, where I actually see the biggest gaps in confidence come through, I would argue, almost all of those marginalized populations. So that's women, that's newcomers or immigrants, that's African Nova Scotians, that's individuals who are transitioning back to the workforce after being out of it for a period of time. It's individuals who have 10 plus years in something and are trying to start something new. So the commonality is actually what you were just getting at, which is, I don't think I have anything to offer if somebody's asking for mentorship, or what right do I have to ask for somebody for their time? Why do I deserve that? Why should somebody help me? And so it's interesting because we do see that common thread. And oftentimes what we have to talk about is really what you and I were just talking about, which is kind of demything it a little bit and normalizing it. It's not this big, amazing silver bullet. It's an iterative process that is ultimately, if we break it down, about building relationship.
Yeah. I didn't have the same viewpoint as you, and I agree with what you're saying. My initial thoughts when I read the question was, when I think of the strong role model, best mentors that I can think of in my ecosystem and my network, I see a lot more of the strong female leaders having mentees and being mentored, and less of the men. And I've always thought that it's a fear of that intimate relationship. So a fear of like, oh, that's a little close. How about you just ask me a lot of questions and I'll give you lots of guidance. And I wondered if you had seen that as well. It sounds like you're nodding, but.
Yeah. And I think, again, anecdotally, the cool thing about the work that we do, most, like 9 out of 10 of our clients and the mentorship programs that we help them create, mentors are volunteers. There are very, very few exceptions where there is a small stipend of some kind and it makes sense for the industry that we're working with. So these individuals are giving of their time, and the data that we get in terms of why, overwhelmingly, and this isn't surprising, somebody did it for me. And so when we can tap into that, I'm 100% biased because of the nature of that. We're inviting people who already understand enough of who they are, they want to give back. They may not, and not all cases, have the belief that they can give back. So the confidence isn't always there. or they don't know how to do it, but the desire to help is there. And that is the place where we can build from. I can't build if you don't want to. We can actually help you understand how to be a good mentor. What does being a good mentor mean? Well, it depends on the program, your objectives, who you are as a person, what your strengths are. We can help you work through all of that. And we do when we train clients with their mentors and mentees around training, right? You can learn those skills. But if you don't have the desire to want to build those skills, we're not for you, right? And that's okay, right? And chances are mentorship isn't for you anyway. And that's okay too.
Yeah. So I'd like to go back to a little bit of your journey into technology, and the way I'd like to end that conversation is when we first started and earlier on in your path, the way I was hearing, and I'm sure I've already told you this, I'm very open with my opinions. When I hear about your business, the first thing that pops to mind is that you're selling volunteer time, is that you're selling the mentors that are all volunteers, and my immediately thought was, oh, that's a scarce resource, and mentor fatigue is a real thing. How can you build a business on that? And the more I learned, it was interesting to see, like, you looked at a bigger picture and you invested in scalability, and you have the software and the technology that built the structure. So that's my external viewpoint as I learned more about your business, is how it changed in my head. I'd love to hear if that's at all the way that you guys think about it, but also when did the technology come in, and how are you using that to, like, what are you don't have to give away proprietary things, just like, but scaling. You're a very people business. You could have matchmakers on phones, but you chose to have software and coders and design and build as a software company. So is that intentional, and how's that working, and any transferable experience?
Yeah. 100% intentional, to achieve the vision. And for me, what drives me when I think about how I'm going to define success for myself, and ultimately for us as a company, is that impact. 1 million is a big number. It's not arbitrary for me. It had to be big enough to force strategic decisions that were going to be scary at times. And technology is one of those, quite frankly. I never in a million years, Levi, would have thought that I would be saying things like, I'm a female founder in a technology company. Like, my younger self would have laughed and been like, what are you doing? You're a people person. You want to do psychology. You want to help people. Yes, it's all true. That hasn't changed. However, I'm one person. I'm one person with a finite amount of hours that I'm going to have on this earth. And so it could never just be me. And as far as I was concerned, it could never just be a team of people, because we would continue to hit walls and limitations. Do we have it all figured out? No, right? If we're crying out loud, you and I were just talking about an integration that we did with another software as we were coming into this that's not working the way it should. So things you learn, but I can say that with a grin on my face, because ultimately, even though we are a technology-enabled business, our strength is our client relationships. So we absolutely still have a high impact model working with our clients to support them in supporting their mentors and mentees, a la technology. The technology is the engine. The heart and soul of what we do is relationship. We model the importance of it by how we work with our clients. And that clearly that evolves, right? As an organization, we figure out, okay, what does a client journey look like? How do we pass over, in loose terms, when it's no longer a sale anymore, but it can't just be me doing the work. I've got to bring in, and now we have a client success team, right? Like, all of the things. Technology, though, for us is absolutely the vehicle by which we can make sustainable, impactful change. So what can be automated without losing that impact for mentors and mentees and clients, we automate. What can't becomes relationship management and process management. And so we're still figuring out, what the balance is between that. But I do not envision that we would ever become 100% only product, because of the nature of the work that we do. It's so much about modeling relationship building. That's what we're trying to do through mentorship, right?
So you're going to keep the human component. You're never going to be Tinder for mentors.
No, no, not in our 10-year strategic plan at this point.
So I always like to ask these questions. Thinking back, chart your own path. You're now with Endpoint. What's is the most exciting thing or moment that you've had, or series of moments in that time?
And I knew you were going to ask this, and so I was thinking about it. And I think the beautiful part for me is I have many. I feel very fortunate, and definitely sitting here in 2021 on the heels of last year, and quite frankly, still in the midst of a pandemic. I'm away from home, which is Bermuda, and watching what's happening there, and they're experiencing this very different than what we are here. And I'm forever grateful that I had the opportunity to build a company doing work that I care so deeply about, that no matter what is going on in other parts of my life, I can get up and do the work because there's somebody else in a different part of the world right now, even, who's seeing the benefit of it. So a really cool, timely moment yesterday, I'm talking with a potential client. The person who I'm now in touch with was one of our very, very first students at the time, way back in 2017, 2018, who was a student who didn't know On Point in that iteration, knew me, knew what we were trying to do. And now I've come full circle. She's now working with the organization that was part of the career map that we helped her build in the early days, where the mentorship was through me and one-on-one. And seeing her own it, smiling, so excited about the work that she's doing because she's connected to it. And the fact that I can rhyme off several of those, that's freaking cool. That's why I do what I do, right?
Yeah, that's great. So the counterpoint to that is that I really do believe that no business owner has it all together, and I love to poke and prod and look for the skeletons. If I was to ask you, looking back last few years, some of the biggest mistakes that are, especially the simple and easy mistakes that you cringe and you're like, I can't believe I did that. I was wondering if you had any examples that you could share.
And it's interesting because, again, when you have a time as an entrepreneur to even just come up above and have conversations like this, where you're talking with somebody for the benefit of others to learn through experience, it causes you to reflect on those things, because so much of the day-to-day is the day-to-day. And even though there may be a tiny part of that day-to-day that is coming up and being, okay, how am I advancing my 3 strategic goals for the year? Most of the day is in the execution of those things and making sure the team's in execution of those things. And so, I don't think I have a great answer, but for me, what rings true, Levi, when I was thinking about that, at this point, it's more actually about missed opportunities for me. Where if I were to kind of rewind the clock and go back to, certain points in the journey of getting to where we are today, going and talking to my younger self, little greener self, going, okay, you needed to get out of your own way. You needed to pick up the phone and call somebody who you knew was going to hold you accountable and call you on your BS and say, why aren't you doing the thing that you know you need to do? So it's a combination of not listening to my own instincts at times, which is 100% confidence-based, right? But also not moving quick enough, sometimes for fear, sometimes for lack of confidence, other times for sheer overwhelm. And there's just too much to do, that you do have to make those sacrifices that at the time may not feel like sacrifices. And it's nothing major that I can put my finger on right now, where we lost a multi-million-dollar contract. But there are opportunities or points in time where if I'd go back, I would hope that I maybe would have taken 5 more steps further than what I did for that reason.
So what I'm interested in, just to double click a little bit further, is,
love that.
Do you think if you did go back and you told, do you think that is anything you could have said that you would have heard? Or do you think that so to make this transferable to a bigger audience, do you think that there's a certain amount of growth necessary to hear and understand some of those things?
100%. And that is So that's part of why I can look back and say it's not regret, because I do think it is about the building blocks, right? I've had to get the road rash a little bit. I've gone through what we talk about with people and why this matters to me so much. I've been in the job that's a job. I'm making money for somebody else whose values don't align with mine. I'm not happy at night. I'm not fulfilled. I never want to go back to that. And I know the power of the opposite. And so there's a wide chasm between those two things that mentors in my own life had been a pivotal part of that. And also groups, quite frankly, like ELP and the Wallace McCain Institute. But you've just like being in a mentor relationship, you've actually got to be receptive and open to it. And otherwise you're just going to keep hitting that wall.
Yeah.
So your question's a fair one. I don't think anything would have changed.
And the only reason I do double click on that is that a lot of people say, I wish I could go back and tell myself to go faster or do things differently. And it's almost like a give yourself a break, because I don't know if we would have listened if we had all the best advice in the world at certain stages of time. Sometimes you do need, but I think it's one of the things I'm hoping to accomplish with these conversations is that people start to ask more questions about experience and growth from other people who have been there. And hopefully we're approaching that. There's another interesting alignment we have in both of our past projects. And I'm just looking for your own feedback on whether how you see this challenge. I would say that both of us have taken paths that are tackling large, systemic, really big, complicated problems with big impact goals when we could have chosen easier things to make money at. And I'm just wondering whether, like, have you ever come up against that, or what are your thoughts on that? Because I see it in both of our histories and our current projects.
Yeah, one of my most transformative mentors, who is absolutely somebody who I still look at through that lens, although our relationship has shifted slightly. He's kind of more into an advisory role now, but I know has my best interests at heart. He never has been worried about what the outcome is. It's about what makes me happy. So he consistently asks me that question. When you have somebody who knows you well enough, and there's serious trust, right? So I'm talking about a multi-year relationship, and that person has also reminded me on many occasions, you're choosing this. You could have gotten a job here, here, and here. Let me tell you the opportunities that I fielded or that I saw could have come up for you, because we were, working together really closely for a couple of years, or more closely than what we are now, and was seeing these things, right? And so even though I wasn't as acutely aware of it, because in the early days, it's different. There's an energy, you're solving problems, and it's all new. Well, 3 years in, it's still all new, but it's a different kind of new. They're bigger questions, they're bigger problems. I'm clearer on why I'm doing this. So it doesn't factor into my mind at all. There is no alternative. Like, this is it, right? Like, this is my thing. This is my baby. I love what I do. I am choosing it each and every single day, each and every single minute. I choose this. But yeah, 100%. It's not a job. I think entrepreneurship, if I was to kind of add to my definition earlier, part of the crazy, I think it has to be a calling, because it goes deeper than a function, deeper than a skill set. It's all of those things, right? It's pervasive.
So I believe in the saying that every good strength overplayed can become a weakness. And confidence becomes arrogance, et cetera, et cetera. So I believe in great things be accomplished by entrepreneurs who are tackling big goals, for-profit, non-profit. But I know a lot of people, and a past self, myself included, that this is all I have to win, or I have this big issue, or I'm going to solve these problems, makes it easy for you to pay yourself less. Put your mask on first, take a break. And I don't need specifics about your choices, but I'm interested about because it seems to be externally that you have a little bit more balance than some of the other people I'm thinking of. And I'm wondering how you've navigated some of those, like, I have this big purpose and complex thing and a need to have an impact versus giving yourself the things that you need to be a better person. I'm wondering if that's intentional design, or if there's anything you can share that would help others.
Yeah, also 100% intentional. It was in the early stages. So when I was making the transition between working for somebody else, for all intents and purposes, it was a startup with a lot of gray hair, right? So it was very much an entrepreneurial environment. We were talking burn rate. We were talking, how many months we had, and they were months, not years, and doing the roller coaster ride. So I was experiencing a little bit of what that kind of life could look like. I could see the wear and tear on that particular entrepreneur, what it was doing to the company, to the relationships that person had. And many nights, quite frankly, where I was on the brunt end of it, right? So I'm the one that stuff rolls downhill, and it was like, okay, you know what? That's not me. I never want that, because working to live isn't my definition of living. So a couple of things came out of that. One, I was clearly in the wrong place doing the wrong thing with the wrong people. So that was a bit of a, oh crap, I know that. I have no idea what's next. So hence really going through this whole journey myself of figuring out what is next. But I knew at my core, the second part was, I don't want that. I don't want all the time. I'm diluted in every single relationship that I have. So I'm never full. I'm never fully present. And so it has been something that, it's a constant part of when I look at my calendar, when I think about how I use my time, how quite frankly, I talk about time with my team and how I learn through them, how I talk with individuals like you and with my peer group and go, okay, help me understand how to be my best self and what that means and looks like. Because then by being my best self, I actually give the best of me to the work that I'm trying to do, which is big work. And if I don't put my own mask on first, nobody wins.
Yeah.
Right. So I would encourage people to think about it. And it's not easy. I'll just say that, like, it really isn't. And I think part of entrepreneurship, part of the old school definition is that you're exhausted and you're hating life and you're working all the time. I'm sorry. I just don't buy into that. I can have a profitable company doing good work while also having a social life and a family life that is meaningful. I think we can.
It's an important conversation to keep having, and I'm glad we can just highlight it and bring it up. Although I struggle with that. I've never fully learned the lesson. I'm guessing that most of my team, and I know that you probably don't know, but I only have one tattoo, and it's across my leg, and it says "Work to live, not live to work." And it's not because I believe in it, although I do. It's because I've never been able to learn it. So it's actually tattooed in ink on my leg. Small tangential fact to the conversation.
Very cool. Now I won't forget.
So I have a couple of really great questions I'd love to bring into the conversation. One is, in the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your life?
That's a great one, Levi. I love that. I borrowed that.
I'm not taking credit. No, I stole it from the audience. So
great question, audience. It's confidence. And this understanding that confidence is not this.
Before you go forward, do you think that's a belief, behavior, or habit?
All.
Yeah, there we go.
All. To actually say it and mean it and live it, it's all. And it's hard to reflect back on it, on yourself. And it comes through individuals seeing you different, who, again, you trust, can say to you, wow, you're showing up differently, or you look happier, you look different. And when you start to think about instances of time, I'm more confident, Levi, in that I know what I'm doing in terms of why I'm doing what I'm doing. I do not know what I'm doing in terms of how to build a business the right way. There is no right way, right? I'm figuring it out like everybody else, but I know my why. It centers me and gives me the confidence that backs up the beliefs that I can get passionate in the actions that go along with it to stick with. When, believe me, there are months, going back to our other question, where the balance is very much skewed. So November last year, I was flat out. Most of my time was business. And that happens. There are cycles. It can't happen all the time, right? So that confidence in self, and man, it's a beautiful thing, but it's not, you have to continue to work at it.
If you were, just to make it something a little bit more transferable for folks, if you were to invest in one activity or thing or book or podcast or habit that would put somebody on the journey towards improved self-confidence, what would it be?
Find a mentor.
Nice plug.
100%. Somebody, long-term relationship, at least 8 months, who you're going to be really vulnerable with. Watch Brine Brown's talk on vulnerability. Buy into it. Invest in yourself first and foremost. Use other people to help you do that and stay accountable to it.
Yeah, one of those things that's easy to say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Another great question. You've already mentioned one really great mentor. Do you have any other examples, specifically mentors that have shaped your life?
Yep. And it's interesting going back to our kind of definition of mentorship, right? And what does a mentor look like? One of the individuals that I would have, I'm going back, first year out of university, I was engaged with a small company doing consulting work for the province of Nova Scotia. And one of the individuals that I got to learn from, and this is with the Department of Natural Resources, predominantly male-dominated fields, quite frankly, high level of expertise in different domains from biodiversity to forestry. And there was an individual who was the head, she was their director of strategic planning. To watch her work was just, it's a lesson that I could not appreciate then. I've since absolutely understood the value of what she was doing, and watching her work through so many complex problems with very, very rooted, firm beliefed individuals.
So polite.
She was one of those individuals that I never called her a mentor to her face at that point in time. I hope that I've reflected back to her now that I did learn through her experiences, but that was definitely, it was informal. I learned through watching and then talking with her years afterwards, right? And quite frankly, one of the very few female mentors actually that I've had in my career, in the early years, and something that it's something I'm looking at and working on, right?
So we've talked about your mentors and your influences that are people-based, relationship-based. I'm curious about, and I assume that you are also interested in reading and other influence. You've mentioned TED Talks. If you were to recommend a book or a resource aside from the relationships, what are the number one things that you're recommending, especially to other entrepreneurs? Like, picture yourself 5, 6, 7 years ago. Who are you recommending? What are you reading?
So for female entrepreneurs in particular, the Confidence Code. It can be hard to read some of it, honestly, because some of those stark data points and truths, they don't sit great, but really, really interesting to understand the psychology behind what happens and what can get in the way. So foundationally, quite frankly, it's not just for female entrepreneurs, but in particular, there's a special place there. Another good book that was given to me by someone in my early, foundational years, and now I pass along with the team. It's called Getting to Maybe. Can't remember who the author is, but it is about solving complex problems like the AIDS crisis, and how do you catalyze communities to come together to create change on big things that are not going to be solved overnight. Really fascinating reads interspersed with some inspirational kind of poems and literature in there. And then right now I'm loving the Walt Disney's book. Bob Iger's story, that and Netflix. And I'm somebody who I never really, I know reading is important. I've typically read for pleasure, but I'm now invested in both of those books and kind of can't put them down. Very transferable to the stage that our business is in right now. 3 years ago, 5 years ago, no, I wouldn't have even picked it up. Right now, though, in the messy middle and trying to figure out growth opportunities and aligning resources, fascinating reads from people who also really care about people and culture.
Yeah, I just recently listened to a long format podcast with Bob Iger and quite enjoyed it. So I forgot that there was a book. Great. So, I mean, we could talk forever. There's questions here I'm purposely not asking because they'll become such long-winded conversations. So maybe there's a 2.0. My hope is that that you've enjoyed the conversation. My final thought is there anywhere that you wish that I had taken the conversation, or any final words that you'd like to share?
Also, I think, again, the opportunity to come above this, and come above the day to day, and actually reflect and remind myself that I chose the crazy, that I choose the crazy each and every single day, and why. They're good things to do, right? And I would leave, I guess, with saying totally open to a 2.0. And for anybody who's interested, we do have resources. We have a blog page. It's not the easiest to find. We're working on it. But where we do talk about how do you find a mentor? How do you engage a mentor? What questions to ask as a mentor? So we do try and get at some of these things. And I would say for anybody who's with us today or watch this later, if you've got questions around mentorship relationships, please send them our way, because we would love to be able to talk about it in whatever format makes sense, because we want to build capacity of people who want to engage in those relationships, right? So thanks for the stage to do that.
Great. So I enjoyed the conversation. I'm sure it won't be the last. I am going to bring this to a close. We'll come down to the tables, and I'm sure there'll be a few follow-up questions. So thank you very much.